Man, this Jim Lil guy really got people excited. Jim Lil is a YouTuber that released a video recently comparing an expensive Neve vintage preamp versus a Focusrite 2i2 preamp or something like that. I watched the video. I'm going to have the link in the description below. You should definitely check it out if you haven't, if you're into engineering. For those of you who don't know me, I've been an audio engineer for 16 years. I'm in the studio almost every single day recording vocals. Sometimes I record other instrumentation, but I do a lot of vocal work. I work with a lot of musicians. I get to test preamps. I get to try things out, and we do our own scientific experiments. Anytime a new piece of gear comes in, we do all sorts of experiments to see how it behaves. The controversy, I think, is one of the best parts about this entire video. If you just watch the video, the amount of depth that he goes into to create a scientifically accurate test, I love it. His cockiness, I love that too. It reminds me of an engineer. You see, us engineers, we're all kind of assholes at the end of the day. We all love having this like deep-rooted opinion about what makes something good or bad. The ones that are wise understand the nuance between these types of discussions and probably think that these types of discussions are kind of worthless at the end of the day. I'm not saying I'm wise, but I tend to sit in that camp where I think that musicians and the music are the most important thing. And just like any profession, there are tools out there that make the job easier. They steer the direction of the job, the right tool for the job, and they make things nice. And if you're sitting there, 10 hours a day working on music, you're going to want the gear that you want. You're going to want the tools that you want. You're going to want to have fun doing that. Anytime I get a new compressor or something like that in, I really go to town. Like, it makes me excited to test it out and see how it responds. And I listen to the things that work and what doesn't work. And I try to adjust the settings, make sure everything works within the workflow, and develop my opinion on that piece of gear. Now, I'm not saying this video that he made was completely worthless, because it's incredibly fascinating the amount of effort that he put into this video. I have never come close to putting that much effort into one video. And there's also like 100 other YouTubers that are engineers that have their own opinions on preamps, and they all have made rebuttal videos. I wasn't really going to do one, but I feel like there's a message that we need to talk about here. And I'll get to that here in a second. There's a lot of engineers that are saying that his test wasn't the right kind of test because he's using a clean vintage Neve preamp, and because it's a clean preamp, it's not going to saturate and have all these characteristics. If you're not an engineer, you probably don't care about the details, the nuances. But every music creator has this in their mind of, does gear matter? Should I be buying the $10,000 microphone, or should I be okay with a $100 microphone? And I think that anytime anybody has a conclusive opinion about something, it's not necessarily the truth for everybody. Everybody's different. Everybody's going through different stuff. Did he waste money buying this preamp? Probably. The biggest flaw in this test, in my opinion, is that it's not going through an entire chain of hardware to get a specific sound. There's a lot of factors that go into a tool being a good tool, or an instrument being a good instrument, or whatever. Musicians and engineers especially get lost in this conversation about like how good something is or how bad something is. But the truth is you can make almost anything work almost any amount of time. There will be some instances where some pieces of gear will perform better for that specific thing that you're trying to do. And going to a nice studio, they will have the variety of things, so when those things happen, they know where to pull from, and the expertise of those engineers to know when to pull from those things. But when you're at home, you absolutely don't need those things. To be somebody who makes music for fun at home, trying to buy a $10,000 mic or even a $2,000 preamp, you need to realize that you're doing this for the hobby side of things, not as a business. Because as a business, spending $2,000 means that you need to make at least $2,000 off of that preamp. And for most musicians, that doesn't work. So the goal is to figure out how to use the gear that you have and spend the money where you need to spend it as a business. For fun, though, you could spend as much money as you want. I see people with home studios that have barely any treatment, but they've got $10,000 monitors in their room. That's for fun. It's insane the amount of effort people are willing to skip just to get the right kind of gear. In our studio, when we built our Studio B, which just finished this last year, the amount of time and effort that we spent on the acoustics, the building materials, the fine tuning of the room to get a certain tone and controllability. The goal for this was when we put a microphone in that room, randomly anywhere in that room. Yes, every room has sweet spots, but I wanted to be able to put it in more places in that room. I wanted to have different kinds of voices sound good in that room. I wanted to have instruments sound good in that room. I want to be able to sit down in the listening position as an engineer and mix the song in an accurate room. And the amount of time and effort that it takes to get to that point is something that most studios are not willing to do unless you're a higher end studio and you have an insane amount of money. But if you're a home studio, put some stuff up in the room, throw a mattress on the wall. But the point is that I've seen a lot of things done right and I've seen a lot of things done wrong. And the song may or may not suffer that much from it. Now, we as the engineers, we might sit there and be like, oh, this thing is, I could hear the background reverb in the room when I'm mixing this vocal. The guitar sounds kind of thin and it's got all these little problems and I'm sitting here tearing the rest of my hair out. Meanwhile, if the song is really good and the song hits, then the song hits. Yes, you always want to be doing better as an engineer, as an artist. You are trying to get better and you're trying to understand your tools and your gear so that way you have a controlled environment to practice within, to reduce the variability of all of the results. A professional recording studio understands the difference between all these variabilities. A great engineer can listen to the difference between one preamp versus another and know which one to choose versus another one. They've done tests. Now, Jim Lill over here gets a little bit cocky at the end, saying that nobody's done these tests, only he's done these tests. I feel like he's highly underestimating the scientific nature of a lot of nerdy engineers and the types of detail that they go into just to tune their room. But when you've recorded thousands of songs using a certain set of preamps and then you switch to a different one and you notice a behavioral difference, could be even a noise floor or what happens once it gets close to that ceiling. What is the nature in which it saturates under different conditions? They will be able to notice those things. Is it 100% scientific as if it's an actual scientific test? No. This is audio. There is science mixed with art in there, and it's never the same twice. Even Jim taking the same performance and splitting it off in two separate directions is only giving us one performance. But what happens when you record 1,000 artists with 1,000 different voices and tones and playing styles and mic etiquette deficiencies? All of these things change all the time. So how do I navigate through this land of art and science and how to think about all this stuff? I've learned to relax a little bit on it and not be so uptight about the tiniest details and just have a great time making the best song possible, because the song is more important than anything else. The client means more than anything else. The artistic direction means more than anything else. In the beginning of the video, Jim was talking about his favorite bands playing through this certain console, and he wanted to get their preamps to get that sound. But the truth is their song is the song, that moment in time, the decisions the engineer made, that the next day the temperature in the room would be different. He might be thinking something different. He got in an argument with his spouse or something, and the settings would be slightly different. The sound would be changed in a mixed setting. If the song was recorded a year later, but it was the same song. All these things make a bigger difference than which preamp they're using. We can't be too uptight thinking about these details. Yes, we do spend time fine-tuning and understanding what this gear does, but once we know that, we need to be in a flow state while making a song. We need to be making a great song. We need to be making a great song. If saturation and distortion actually make it harder to mix that song and make it take longer to make sound great versus having a clean signal, then those adjustments are made on the fly. That's usually how a session goes. A lot of clients aren't going to give you infinite amount of time to get everything perfect. And once they get the perfect take, if it was a little bit too hot, they're not going to want to go back and redo that take. And if they do, it just ruins the momentum for a second. My advice to YouTubers that talk about gear all the time: YouTube wants you to speak in absolutes. It wants you to have a hard line in the sand and say, you know what you thought you knew? You don't know it. This is what you should know. And that's kind of what this video does. It's a debunking of our myths. And of course, everybody responds and it becomes a big deal because of that. But what I want you viewers to understand here is that there are many different scenarios in which this advice can be used or not used. This piece of gear that you've been really wanting because so-and-so artist used it, it may not sound good with you. You may get that piece of gear and notice that you just don't like the workflow of using that piece of gear. And there's this other one over here that does. And when you're turning the knobs and you're listening as you're turning the knobs, it just seems to do what you want faster. That's it. That's all we need to care about. And that goes from somebody who's in their first year making music to their 50th year as an engineer or producer or band member. All these things are interchangeable depending on where you're at and how you're feeling that day, all throughout your entire life as a musician. So anybody who's saying, well, he's wrong and I'm right and blah, 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 vice versa, it doesn't matter. To you as the musician or engineer or producer that is making this decision, understand first that you are doing what you want to do and you're going to try things for the fun of it. Yes, I want a $10,000 microphone, but I don't have one. I'm using the newer brand lav mic right now just because I wanted to use that one. I didn't want to spend an extra $200 to get the better one. When I watch videos like this or the rebuttal videos, I like to see it as just a way to learn things, see the experiments play out. But I take everything with a huge grain of salt because at the end of the day, when I sit down to engineer something and a vocalist or a guitar player comes in and wants to use one of these preamps or whatever, at the end of the day, what matters most is the song and what's happening in that moment. And I need a reliable tool to get that job done. There are clients that will not want to work with you unless you have certain gear. So as a business, you have to take that into consideration. I don't like to think that way. If you want a certain piece of gear and I don't have it, there are other studios that have those things. I wish we could work together, but we can't, apparently. Anyways, the gear matters. The gear doesn't matter. All of these things are true. There are certain pieces of gear that I wouldn't want to live without, and that's very custom to me and my workflow and the way that I like to mix. If somebody came along debunking that piece of gear or something like that, saying that it's worthless or a simple plugin can do better, I don't care. I'm going to use the gear that I want to use. I love the science. I love understanding those types of things. But in a workflow in a song, there are thousands of decisions that need to be made. There's an entire process that needs to happen for a song to be made. And focusing on one little tiny piece of it is going to make you overthink or make decisions that aren't yours. The reason why you test your gear is so you know your boundaries and you learn what you like to do with that gear so you can use it easily for when it comes time for the performance to happen or to mix that performance or whatever. I've had enough. I'll talk to you later.